Okay. Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all our participants joining us from around the globe. My name is Farah Yasmine, President of Farah Law School, and I'm honored to be your moderator for today's session. And welcome to the Farah Law School's four virtual lecture series held in celebration of International Moon Day. And today's episode is titled Governance from the Ground Up, the Bolivia Moon Agreement, and an Inclusive Lunar Framework. All right, so today we delve into how traditional voices, specifically young indigenous community members from Bolivia with backgrounds in ecology, medicine, and business, co created a grown up lunar framework drawing from local governance lessons in the Amazon. And this effort highlights the power of inclusivity and youth in shaping the multiplanetary future they will inherit. And before we begin, please note a few quick virtual guidelines here. Kindly keep your microphones muted during the presentations and feel free to drop your questions into the chat box at any point during the lecture or use the raise hand feature during the Q&A session. And without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Lakshmi Karan. Dr. Lakshmi is a social impact leader, space entrepreneur, and the co-founder of LunARC, where she works to make space exploration inclusive and accessible. And her career bridged technology, philanthropy, and social innovation, backed by degrees in mathematics, system management, international law, and diplomacy, and a Ph.D. in international relations. So please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Lakshmi Karan. Dr. Lakshmi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Farah. Thank you, everyone, for making time to listen to about our work. And I really look forward to your questions because what I'm going to share with you might be quite out there, even though we're talking about space. So with that warning, I'm going to share my screen and stop my presentation. So can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, when we talk about space, right, space exploration, this is the image that most of you think about. So this is a SpaceX rocket. Everyone is talking about the rockets. The lunar lander, Chang'e 7, is scheduled to launch in a couple of days to the moon. And so much of how we think about space these days is technology. But I really want to kind of start off with the point saying, technology is the easy part, even though it's very hard. It's very hard to send anything to the moon. It is the easy part. Because what is really hard is how we get along. Humans have lived on this one spaceship Earth for as far as we can remember. And we still find it incredibly hard to collaborate, to cooperate, to share resources, to negotiate. And so as we go hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth in a very hostile environment, being prepared not only with technology that would help us survive, but also with the tools that would help us thrive, because it's not a one shot and done. I think it's a very important part. So with that, I want to share a little bit about what LunARC is. As Farah shared, I co-founded LunARC. We're a nonprofit. We're very young. We're about 3 years old. But the real purpose of why I started LunARC was really to put the human in the center of space exploration. With 9 billion people on Earth and the celestial body, the moon, that we all see, and there are cultures that our ancestors have centered religions and cultures around the moon. So these cosmic companions to Earth are something that's a shared heritage for all of humanity. And so it's really important for us that we don't lose the importance of what it means for all humans as we start to kind of get excited about science and exploration and development. So that's really LunARC. What do we do? So we do two things primarily. We think of it this way. LunARC's purpose is really radical inclusion and radical imagination. Now, what does that mean? Radical inclusion is we want to demonstrate that no matter where you are on earth, you could be a poor student you could be a poor student somewhere in Africa, you could be a farmer, you could be a chef, you could be an accountant. You have a right to be in this conversation on what happens to our commons. It doesn't have to be just a billionaire. You don't have to be a Ph.D. from MIT or a scientist. And I think that's what we mean by radical inclusion. And the second part is radical imagination, okay, which is and I know I'm speaking to law school and lawyers, so I want to start off with this by saying most of law is interpreting the rules somebody else wrote, okay? But if you actually think about it, constitutions were imagined. Somebody, a group of founders said, this is how we want to have society. They imagined constitution. Things like human rights law that many of us might take, for granted was first imagined by somebody. And so really, I think the first building block of law I see is imagination. And for the first time in our history of our species, we are going to a new world. And there is an opportunity, a blank slate to imagine possibilities that we've been trying to fix on Earth. So I think really radical imagination is the crux of what we do. Now, there are two things that we do to inspire imagination and inclusion. One is global campaigns. And the most recent one we did is we invited, over 30,000 people across 40 countries, particularly people who, we might say are invisible in our current day-to-day, people who live in poverty, people who live in remote areas, tribal, indigenous youth, to actually share their visions for what a lunar settlement or a lunar community might be. And we collected this and we did something last year. We sent it to the moon. So we sent the first digital art gallery to the moon on the Firefly lunar lander successfully. And what it actually showcased is you could be the poorest person on Earth, and yet you have a right to be in the conversation of what happens on the moon. So that was really the spotlight that we wanted to do with that mission. And then we have a second mission that is scheduled to go on Astrobotic's Griffin lander later this year or early next year, where we invited indigenous people from around the world to share their ancestral wisdom around what it means to take care of our cosmic commons. Again, the counterpoint that we are trying to always bring is rockets and lunar landers and rovers may feel new, but humans have been voyagers and explorers and thinking about these for a long time. And we want to make sure that we bring that cultural heritage knowledge into thinking about how we would expand to the moon. The second thing that we do, and that's really what brings me to the core point of this talk, is we invite students, young people, to really imagine governance, because one of the first things that we need to solve for is the rules of like how do things get distributed, who gets to do what. A lot of that is still not firm. So we have a window of opportunity where we can actually bring new ideas from people in all walks of life to help us understand what might be the best way to craft these rules for the moon or the moon constitution or the charter. And so these design labs are really where we kind of invite students. And as Farah talked about in Bolivia, we had the opportunity to work with students who were studying like ecology or tourism or business, and actually invite them to say, bring your knowledge from your field. You don't know anything about space, you're not space lawyers, but your voice matters. Because 20 years from now, you will be the leaders who will have to handle the problems that come from whatever happens in space. And it's important that you are part of deciding what that future is right now. So that's really what led us to the Bolivia lab. Okay, let me show you what happened in Bolivia. And I'll tell you, it was quite surprising for us. We went in not, with an open mind to say, we'll just hear what the students have to say. But what they came up with, and particularly the lawyers in this, watching this, I think you'll find it interesting. But first, let me just play a very short video, and it'll give you an idea of what the lab was.
LunARC is a nonprofit. And the idea behind LunARC is that, we're seeing the systems in the world fall apart. And everyone's struggling and trying to figure out how do we fix it. At the same time, you have a young generation that wants hope, that is going to inherit this future. So the motivation for LunARC was really, how do we invite young people who will inherit the future to be the designers of it? And then we use the moon. It's really a mirror to say, if we were to imagine a blank slate, a place where nothing exists, and create, then what might we learn that we bring back to Earth? We hope that they will come with courage, with a lot of insight, and the desire to explore new frontiers, to open new areas of learning, of co-learning, and to embrace the unique opportunity to cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate with peers.
Tenemos que pensar más en grande y tener fe en nosotros mismos, porque incluso teniendo pocas oportunidades, pocos privilegios, hay formas de poder involucrarse en estos espacios.
So there you go. Everyone got a free trip to Bolivia. And so what the students did is they spent 2.5 days really answering some framework questions, right? Who owns the moon? Who gets to use the resources? How are the resources distributed? If there is a conflict on the moon, how do you settle it? How do you hold someone accountable? How do you hold a business accountable? How do you hold a country accountable? All of these questions that we're all wrestling with, they were asked to answer. And what came out of it was really incredible, because without even reading the 1979 Moon Agreement, as I'm sure all of you know, in 1979, there was a treaty, which for most purposes is now dead and in the ashes. The students addressed every line of the treaty. And not only did they come up with the same idea, but they actually made it better. They closed the loopholes. And so I want to just give you a glimpse to a few of the articles, and I'll give you the link to the full treaty for you guys to read. But really, so take a look. Let's just look at the 1979 treaty, right? I just pulled out a few articles. So Article 11. Article 11 says no one can own the moon, which is great. It is, of common heritage. But the rules for specifically around that were left for later, okay? Article 3 banned nuclear weapons. Article 20 said you can sign the treaty as a country, and then if you decide you want to get out of it, you can walk away. Article 14 and 5 touched on the ideas of if something went wrong, you have to inform the authorities, the UN body. You have to report what went wrong. And Article 6 said, sharing moon samples was optional. So this was the 1979 treaty. Of course, remember again, the students never read the treaty. They answered all of this on their own and made it better. So what did the true students come up with? They basically said, yeah, no one owns the moon, but let's also be specific. Just because you got there first, it doesn't mean you get an advantage. And I think that's a very important thing we have to think about these days, because you have a lot of countries that don't have the ability to go to the moon. that don't have the ability to explore lunar resources or to mine. There's going to be just a few countries that do that. And so kind of approaching it and saying what happens to all the other countries is an important part. The second thing that they did was they went all out. So the 1979 said banned nuclear weapons. The students said ban all weapons. Like we're not even entertaining the idea of having weapons on the moon. The third part that they talked about, again, these are examples. They addressed all of the articles in the treaty. But this one really is, yes, you can walk away. So let's say I signed the treaty. I can walk away from the treaty, but you are still held responsible and accountable for the harm you already caused. Again, kind of closing any loopholes that might be there. And this, I think, as young people, as you all are watching this, right, I want to kind of think of you of your governance issues. Wherever you live, you're seeing governance failures. You're seeing the rules not being held accountable. And so while the treaty said, inform the authorities, you go to the panel, the commission, you write a report, you report, that's great. But actually the student said, no, make it public. No one gets to hide behind, hierarchy and authorities. Whatever happens in our comments has to be made public. And think of things like debris, space debris, right? Like there's usually a report and it's written in a very jargony way and nobody really understands. It's buried somewhere versus actually make it public. And that's an important reflection from the students. And then the last part, what I want to talk about is really sharing moon samples or optional. They basically said it's mandatory. I mean, listen, it doesn't really matter that you got to the moon first, but if you actually found something that could benefit all of humanity, you owe it to share it with all of humanity. Again, I often get asked, wow, this sounds so utopian, oh my God, will the countries agree? Will the companies agree? And my answer to all of that is, we can't stop ourselves from wanting the right things just because we know it's going to be hard for people to agree on it. I think if we even stop imagining what is correct and what is right, then we're giving up the game before even we play. And I think that's really the invitation to say, let's actually have a conversation with young people who will inherit this future and invite them to actually share what is the ideal world that they want to live in, that they want to govern. And again, I just, for me, I was in Bolivia, and what I really loved about it is with no legal training, they never read the old treaty, yet these students really addressed every bit of the article because the governance failures they're witnessing right now, they're living with, and they can project and they can see how if we don't address these things now, we're going to just be, it might be more Star Wars than Star Trek, if you think about it. So that's a little glimpse into it. Here is, a QR code. Feel free, it'll take you to our website where if you scroll down, there are the PDFs of the Bolivia Moon Agreement in English and in Spanish. And I want to also acknowledge that the student outputs were translated by ICAD, which is our partner, the International Center for Advocates Against Discrimination. So they're lawyers. And then they took the student outputs without flattening it. Like basically the students remain the authors and their ideas remain, original, and translated it. Which kind of brings me to the role of lawyers in our work. As we think of radical imagination, radical inclusion, and we invite perspectives from different groups, it's really important to actually have lawyers who understand the policy and the law frameworks, but are also able to be translators that are able to take what emerges from these labs and translate it into a format that policymakers will understand. So that's a really critical part of our partnerships. Okay, so where now? I love this image, by the way. This is an image of, the different colors of the moon. Where are we going here? our goal for LunARC is we're already running several labs. So I just talked a little bit about Bolivia. We just completed a lab in Cairo. Again, think of our two phrases, right? Radical inclusion, radical imagination. So for Cairo, instead of working with university students, we actually said, we're going to invite the masters of imagination, the gurus, the biggest imagination people on earth, to think about rules for the moon. And I know Farah knows the answer to this, but I'm going to give a little pause and say, if you could think of who is the best in imagination, I guarantee it, you know these people. So we in Cairo invited 4 and 5-year-olds, children, because they really hold the possibilities of imagination, to play games. Again, very similar to the structure and framework we talked about, right? They played games around sharing resources. They played games around, inequity, justice, repair, conflict resolution in their own way, and came up with rules that really we probably all know. There's nothing new, but what they came up with really reminds us that when we go to hostile environments like the moon, like Mars, what we have to remember is what it means to be human when we are working with robots and AI. And I think what the children, in the precious innocence of their lives, have reminded us is, how do you carry the humanity with you when you go? So those are just examples. We're doing another lab in India around inviting musicians to think about the rules of music and think about how would that shape governance. The idea really is, the more diverse ideas and perspectives we have, the more inclusive whatever emerges for our future will be. Otherwise, listen, we most certainly will default to property rights and maritime law, and not that they're bad, but I think we need a bigger portfolio of ways to think about it. Okay, so imagine if you had, thousands of these labs, right? One of the things that we always felt is we have to have a real audacious goal to this human story of young people collaborating to design futures on the moon. And so one of the things that we're inviting young people to do is establish the first learning entity on the moon. We're calling it the Lunar University for now. And the idea is that through each of these labs, the students are going to solve for various aspects of a society. You're going to solve for the governance problem. You could be solving for curriculum. You could be solving for habitat design. You could be solving for all of the different aspects of a society. And then collectively, the youth then build and deploy a university on the moon. So this is our big 30-year goal. But I share that to say each of these labs are really an important piece of that puzzle. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Frank White's term, the overview effect. When astronauts go off Earth and they look back, they don't see the borders. They see a blue marble. And they see this one thing that is so fragile and suspended. And I think what we really hope for is, by connecting all of these youth labs, that we can actually stimulate that sense of the overview effect. So that's the idea for it. So before I wrap up, I just want to say the rules are still being written. Okay, so this is an opportunity for young lawyers everywhere to actually be the first. And think of it this way: you would actually be laying the stone for a pyramid that would last for centuries, for thousands of years. So this is an opportunity to really start thinking about, what do you want? If you were to craft the rules, how would you write them so you don't repeat the problems you see on Earth? And how would you design these rules? Again, don't hold on to, oh, will it happen? And would this government sign on? No, we're not talking about that. We're first talking about, what are your ideas? and how do we actually, if we get, 100 million young people around the world to advocate for something, I guarantee you that would become the law. And so that's really the purpose of how we want to move forward on this. Okay. I think that's pretty much a wrap for me. I think I'm pretty much on time, Farah. So thank you so much for listening. Happy to answer any questions. I am not a lawyer, so if it's a very serious legal question, I'm going to say pass.
Amazing, amazing. You're very on time. So thank you very much, Dr. Lakshmi, for that brilliant, insightful, and truly inspiring presentation. It is remarkable to see how grown-up governance models can reshape our vision for learn fabrics. All right, so we will now open the floor for our Q&A session. I think I got one from Christian Huang. With simple words made by children, how can emerging space nation leverage framework like the Bolivia Moon Agreement in international policy discussion?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So Christian, the way we're just starting, okay? So one lab is not going to change the policy discussion. But what these labs, as we have more of these, and then you start to see how, from 10 youth from 10 countries are all talking about the same thing. And they're trying to draw from their cultural experiences and their indigenous law practices, and they're bringing it. Then you start to see a thread, a pattern of what the language should be, right? So I think the idea, what we are starting to do now is actually say, first, two things. How can youth actually have the space to imagine these rules? And second, what are pathways for their ideas to be actually presented in rooms where deliberations are happening? So as you probably know, there are different sessions in the UN that are going to be looking at certain aspects of space law. So our idea is to present the Bolivia Moon Agreement as one other document to say, is there anything here that can be used as you think about it? But let's just think 2 years out, right? 2 years from now, we would have had 100 labs. And that would be over 1,000 young people across 40 countries coming up with various agreements and rules. And then you start to see the thread of where the energy is and what needs to be addressed. So that's really how we're thinking about it. But the realist point of, will the leaders listen to the voices of the youth? That remains to be seen. I hope they do. But that is a big question that I hope the leaders pay attention to.
All right, Christian, what do you think? Does it answer your question? Okay, amazing, amazing. All right, so perhaps from our active, Chico, yeah, you raise your hand, so the floor is yours.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Hi, my name is Chico. I'm glad to meet you, everyone. I have a question about what key advice would you to young scholars and non-legal professionals who want to contribute to space governance?
Sorry, Farah, I couldn't hear his question. Can you repeat it for me just to?
Fajar, do you want me to repeat your question, or do you want to repeat the questions by yourself?
Okay. I have a question about what key advice would you to young scholars and non-legal professionals who want to contribute to space governance?
Yes. Our focus, Chico, is exactly non-space professions and young people. We are not focusing on anybody in the space sector. we are focusing on the people, not even in STEM and science, we're focusing on the humanities, right? And here's the simple invitation. I don't know how, everywhere in the world, and where are you based? Are you in Madura?
Yes, we basically on Madura Island.
In Madura Island, okay. Every one of us have stories and relationships to the moon, okay? We all look up, we all had our grandmothers and our mothers told us stories about it. We all have it in our history and culture. And so the invitation for young people is don't stop yourself because you don't have certain qualifications or you feel you are not, I often hear the story that, Elon Musk wanted to go to Mars. He didn't sit around asking permission. Should I go to Mars? He said, I want to go to Mars. We're going to Mars, right? And so the question really is for young people to say, don't stop yourself. And what we are providing are opportunities to say, okay, if there is a community in Madura, let's just take, for example, let's make sure there's an artist community in Madura. And they say, well, how can we artists be a part of the space conversation? LunARC can have a design lab in Madura where the artists come and say, based on what we feel, our lived experiences and our cultural heritage and our ideas, this is how we would design a society, or this is how we would design a habitat that is more inclusive, right? We could invite, on that point, we could invite people with disabilities to say, if you were to design an inclusive space habitat, how would you design it? Because you can imagine the world is designed not with them in mind. They have to navigate so much hardship. And so I think the answer to your point is, first, the invitation from LunARC is, if you're a young person and you care about space, listen, if you don't care about space, that's fine. But if you care about what's happening, you have a right to be in that conversation. It doesn't matter what your background is, whether you're rich, poor, you have a degree, it doesn't matter what your field is. You could be a cook, you could be a farmer, because all of us have relationship to the moon. And that is the only thing you need to be a part of that conversation. I hope that answered the question. Farah, did you think it did? Chico?
I think I good for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chico. All right. Does anyone has any question? All right, perhaps I will ask a question. Because we promote inclusivity, do you think that language barriers will be a challenge to talk about the Moon Agreement, Bolivia Moon Agreement, something like that, if we want to implement the regulations?
Yeah. No. Partly because one of the benefits of this is we live in the age of AI, Farah, where there are a lot of tools to help with translation. So when we did the workshop in Bolivia, it was entirely in Spanish. This is the language of the students, right? And then we took the outputs from there and we actually translated it to make sure it was valid and the student and got it verified that the translation was accurate before we summarized it in English. What we would be running in India or what we would do in Cairo would be in different languages, right? So the way we're thinking about it is whatever emerges from each of these labs, the different instruments, because they're all not going to be the Moon Agreement. Bolivia is the Moon Agreement. In Cairo, it's a Moon Charter, right? It could be different instruments. The distribution of it and the translation of it, we use a lot of AI tools to ensure that it's done the right way without flattening the content. I see a question in the chat from Infinix.
I don't think it's a question. I think it's an insult. I've kidded on. I'm not sure. Is using like fake names and then ask something. irrelevant question. I'm so sorry for that, everyone.
Right.
All right, perhaps, do you have another questions, dear participants? Perhaps Amal, Dave, Januar, B, Muhammad Rizki, Yahdi, Shauki, Tiara, uh, Mel, Atul. Feel free if you have any questions. All right, perhaps another question from my side. It's going to be the last question from my end. Because currently most of our scholars promote a soft law, but in the same time, there's a lot of critical issues happening right now, like we ban weapons or something like that, but actually there are weapons in outer space and they are targeting the moon at the moment. Do you think if we shift everything, like for example, Bolivia Moon Agreement into something that we can call a binding instrument, do you think it's relevant at the present stance, or do you prefer to keep it in soft law, or do you think hard law would be best for that?
Or prefer to keep it in soft law for now. Yeah. I think, again, I want to say this is the first of many. And, we need critical feedback. This is just one. We're not going to say this is it. This is one. So what we're saying is it's important to actually have avenues for young people to be able to share and see what shapes up. And then when you have a significant amount, then, groups like yours can actually take a look at like 5-10 instruments and say, okay, does any of this merit going, into, but there's also, the bigger problem now, Farah, is there are actually no avenues for young people to be able to feed into these systems. Now, there are certainly consultations, there are certainly certain groups are represented, but if you actually think about the majority of young people in many countries, they may have a lot of ideas or interest to even participate and excited about being part of the space endeavor, but there are no avenues for them to get their ideas. So for now, I think soft law would be the path.
Okay, thank you very much to Dr. Lakshmi for answering all of the questions. And I think as we conclude today's session, I want to express our deepest gratitude to you, Dr. Lakshmi, for sharing your time, expertise, and vision with us today. And special thanks as well to our co-organizers and supporting partners, especially International Moon Day Committee, and to all of you in the audience for your active participations. And inclusivity in space governance is not just an ideal, but as we learned today, it is a practical necessity for a sustainable multiplanetary future. If you have any question or you would like to collaborate with Lunar, feel free to contact Ms. Lakshmi. Dr. Lakshmi, do you want to share your contacts to our
Yes. If you go to our website, so that QR code was there, or www.LunARC, LUNARC.org, and then there's a contact form. We're really starting to collaborate with different young universities or even music groups or like artists. You don't have to be a formal thing. See, that's the whole point. So thank you, Farah, so much for inviting. I know this is quite the radical ideas for a forum like a law school, but I appreciate the courage for you to invite me to share what we do with your community. So thank you, everyone.
I think your idea, LunARC, and your idea is very fresh and brilliant. So thank you very much for sharing everything. And thank you very much, everyone. And before we officially wrap up, we would love to capture a group memory of today's event. So please take a moment to turn on your cameras if you are comfortable doing so. And our team will take a few screenshots. I will count us down. 3. Oh, hold on. Sorry. Okay. It's right here, right now. Okay. 3, 2, 1, smile. Again, one more. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. And to receive your certificate of participation, please make sure to fill out the checkout or attendance form. Um, hold on. Okay. Eh, okay, so please fill out the form. And thank you once again for joining the Farah Law School for virtual lecture series. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world. See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.